Welcome to the Jboy Show, hosted by Jake Crain, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the Jboy Show.
Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you guys hopping in on another edition of the Jboy Show. We got another great episode with you. Got Late Kicks, Josh Pate. We're talking all this crazy merger stuff. You know, we want to get to fall camp, and we're going to preview the season a little bit, but this is just, it's craziness, and I always like getting Josh's opinion. He does a really good job over there. But first, got to shout out betonline.ag. Head over there today. If you sign up, whether it's desktop, mobile, doesn't matter. You get a 50% welcome bonus. You need to make sure you head over there. They've got soccer. We've got Olympics. Anything that your heart desires, and we know we're getting close to college football, and there's lines out there as well for you to play. They're going to play the Sharps. Still waiting on some over and unders, but we're going to get there. But you need to head over to betonline.ag today. From pleasers to teasers to parlays to straight up to team props to game props to player props. It's basically a movie set. They got so many props over there. But you need to head to betonline.ag today and tell them that Jboy sent you. That sign-up bonus is legit, by the way. All right, so my monologue, I'm going to keep this short and sweet. We're going to get to Josh. Had a ton of questions. Adding two teams. Do you go pods? Do you keep divisions? Do you do it like college basketball does and just go straight up? And while it's in flux and minds and opinions can change, I'm not big on the pods. I'm just not, because when I look at divisions, we know the problems we have with divisions. All right, and once you get pods, you know, you're going to have to put Auburn, Alabama in a pod. You know, you're going to have to pretty much put Texas A&M in a pod. You know, and then didn't you put Oklahoma, Texas in the pod with them? I mean, it creates a lot of problems, and you can really achieve the same thing by doing it the way the SEC does in basketball. Now, you do have to understand, I know you guys do, I'm not trying to talk down to anybody, but when you add teams, you have to add games. You know, last year we played an all-SEC conference schedule, which was fine last year, but I love these Georgia-Clemson matchups. I love the Auburn-Penn State matchups, the Texas-Arkansas matchups, the Alabama-Miami matchups. That's good for the sport. It's good early for a litmus test as well. But if you were to say, all right, we got 16 teams, you can pick your three mainstays that you're going to play, and you can rotate it even, and within 4 years, everybody's going to play everybody everywhere. Isn't that the whole point? Isn't that the whole point of scheduling? To try and make everybody play everybody and make it as fair as possible, even though there's no way to make it totally fair, and life's unfair. We get that. But that's the goal to me. So again, does it look bad to finish 16th place? Yes. Well, you know how you fix that? You don't finish 16th. Nobody likes finishing in last. Whether it's 12th or 16th or 7th in the division or 14th overall, it doesn't matter. Win it on the field. And if you really look at it from the addition standpoint, go to a 9-game conference schedule. You add 2 teams, add 1 game to everybody. That's fine. And a huge question off of this, kind of a sidebar off of this, is if you add 9 games, if you make it a 9-game conference schedule, even with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma, you're still probably going to get some non-conference matchups that you like. Not nearly at the clip you're getting now. Because if you look at it from a coaching standpoint or from an administrational standpoint, shoot, if now I got to play Texas or Oklahoma or play both of them, I'm not playing Clemson week 1. Why would I do that? It's almost masochist to do that. But, I mean, you can get your Alabama, Boston colleges. And you may, and look, Notre Dame, who the hell knows? Not going down that rabbit hole again. Who the hell knows with Notre Dame? But if you make me pick between the pods, the divisions, or let's just do it straight up, pick the 3 mainstays and rotate this thing over a 4-year period, why not? Why wouldn't you do that? That's what I would pick. All right, let's get Josh Pate in here. You're going to love this conversation. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Grab some of that merch at thejboyshow.com. Let's get in here and win the water cooler. You better put your floaties on. All right, everybody, let's get to the interview portion of today's show. Very excited to bring on a guest I like to bring on all the time. Love chopping it up with him. You can find him at Late Kick over at 247 Sports as well. Very talented guy, Mr. Josh Pate. Josh, what's up, man?
Well, I thought we were going to be headlong diving into fall camp updates and position battles, and instead we're talking about two Big 12 schools that won't be Big 12 schools for very much longer. So fun times in the neighborhood.
Yeah, it is. And it's funny, for the Texas A&M fans, I feel like they're kind of getting over the hump right now of the anger of not being told what's going on. Now they want to stay and fight. I'm all for that. We may have an Alamo situation in San Antonio at some point again. Josh, your thoughts?
Well, it's kind of, it's equal parts empathy and aggravation for me with A&M. Empathy because I know good and well, and anyone else who disagrees is lying if they say they wouldn't feel the same way if they were in A&M shoes. You absolutely would. So I don't care if you're a fan, if you're a coach, if you're a player, if you're an administrator, like this is understandable. Having said that, though, I have no family, personal, emotional attachment to Texas A&M. I've watched them from afar, like 99% of us have. And it's very frustrating. Here's where the frustration comes in. To watch a program that I really feel is a Doberman that still kind of acts like a puppy at times. And I don't know that many of them have shaken that notion that what Texas does no longer directly dictates how they operate. That was the case for decades, and I get it. And it's really hard to get used to the new normal. But you can look at it one of two ways, and it's inevitable that Texas is coming to the SEC. So accept that. And you can either look at it one of two ways. You can moan and complain, and you can look in your rearview mirror, or you can look out your windshield and understand, well, we're both going to be in the same conference. But, man, with the 9-year head start we've got on those folks, we just totally made ourselves self-sufficient. And if we take care of what we need to take care of, there is no leash around our neck. It's been severed. So it's not attached to Austin, Texas anymore. We don't make some progress and then get our chain yanked backwards to where we can't get too far ahead. That's not the way it works anymore. The way it works now is you got the same opportunity as Georgia has, as Tennessee has, as Alabama has, as anyone else has. And so if you make it happen, great. But if you don't make it happen, it's not going to be because Texas came in the neighborhood and changed the lay of the land. Texas is going to be on equal footing as you are for the first time, by the way, in the history of you guys being in the same conference. That's a reality that for some A&M folks, I don't think is set in quite yet.
Yeah, and again, it's almost like a PTSD type deal. But if you look at A&M's roster and you look at Texas's roster, A&M is very far ahead, especially up front, to where Texas is. They haven't had the follies really that Texas has had, even being in the Big 12. But Josh, when I look at this, and again, Texas always looks at A&M like little brother. And to me, I think that moniker, if I'm an A&M fan, you can never use that again as a Texas fan. Big brother does not follow little brother. It's like the older brother that just took steroids forever and tried to be big and bad, and all of a sudden has to take a job working for the little brother because he set himself up for success better. And when I look at Texas joining the conference, if I'm A&M, well, you've already got a recruiting advantage over them, and that's at Texas, and everybody can say what they want to say, but A&M's out-recruited them, and Texas doesn't need the SEC to have what they should have as a recruiting advantage. But if you're A&M, the way to really bury Texas is you take them out in the backyard and you kick their ass. That's how you do it. And that sends the message. All this stuff on the message boards and this, that, and the other, it all changes when you get out there in the field and you renew this rivalry and you start slapping them around a little bit. I guarantee you, Texas A&M comes out and beats Texas a couple times. You won't hear any A&M fan chirping or being upset about Texas joining the conference. And I agree with that sentiment. It's something they got to get over. It's like the 7 stages of grief, finally get to acceptance and then go beat them. Go beat them at their own game. And I'm interested to see it. And Josh, when you look at the fit, because that's going to be talked about a lot, the fit with Texas and Oklahoma, I look at it like this. Texas is not going to come over here and dominate, especially early. It's unbelievable what Nick Saban has been able to do. I don't think we'll ever see it again after he gets done. It's such a dominating standpoint. Not that somebody won't be the elite of the elite, but to be able to win the amount of championships that Alabama has. But when I look at Oklahoma, I don't think they'll have a problem scoring, but it's defensively, Josh. And I know it's a preemptive move, but when you look at Oklahoma, it reminds me of A&M a little bit coming over here, and even Missouri to a point. They didn't have problems scoring points. It was stopping anybody. And I will go back to the draft because that is a big teller of talent throughout a conference. The Big 12 conference had no first-round draft picks in last year's NFL draft, which is shocking. When you look at the fit, Josh, how do you think the fit of Texas and Oklahoma, and if you mind separating the two because it's all circumstantial in my opinion?
Yeah, Oklahoma. So that stat is both accurate and then I think forward thinking is a little bit misleading because I think if I were to take this year's Oklahoma team, which has been entirely comprised from life in the Big 12, I think you've got several early round Sunday guys starting for them this year, and maybe even on the 2 deep on defense. I think they've gone a long way in rectifying that. Now, that's just pure preview magazine type talk. So then you look forward, and you also have to, if you dive into the recruiting kind of minutia with Oklahoma, they've had no problem recruiting Texas, which is one of the reasons I have called BS largely on this whole advantage that Texas hasn't enjoyed that now they will enjoy. Man,
I agree.
How about this? What conference, not to get sidetracked, but I'm about to get sidetracked. What conference has Ohio State resided in since forever? Because they've had no problem walking into Texas and out recruiting Texas.
That's exactly right.
Hold on a second. Let me write that down. I'm going to make that point on the next show.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I think
sidebar.
that really shoots down a lot of that notion. And so with Oklahoma, they've recruited Texas well, but man, they've also gone to California several times now, and they've been in Florida very heavily these last couple of cycles, to the point where if I didn't tell you they had a Big 12 sticker on their helmet, you'd already think they were an SEC program, because they have recruited the past 2 cycles like an SEC program, which is why I've been so bullish on not just this year, but on the overall future trajectory, and why I always laugh when someone says, well, Oklahoma can't win a national title. Well, I ask why. Well, they can't play defense, and Lincoln Riley can't win a big game. No, friend. They haven't played defense, and Lincoln Riley hasn't won that big game. Hasn't doesn't always equate to can't. It goes right back to what we were talking about with the whole Texas and Texas A&M thing. There may have been a point where you were little brother to Texas, but see, there's a big difference in being a 12-year-old versus 17-year-old brother situation, and being 31 years old and 36 years old. At that point, the physical gap, it's erased. 31 and 36 is just both adults, and so at that point, it's just time to go get yours. And so I think with Oklahoma, the fit is fine. They're in as good a position as a program to make this jump as they've ever been, and I include the Stoops years. With Texas, it's the great unknown. I don't care which conference they're in. If they were independent, it's the great unknown, and the great unknown is taking a guy who's a phenomenal coordinator and asking him to be the face of the program. I mean, it is the biggest chore in college football, you can make the argument at least, to be the head coach at the University of Texas. It's a big chore for Nick Saban, who's the best to ever do it. And Steve Sarkisian, while he's got an impressive resume, obviously doesn't quite fit that kind of description yet. And I really wonder, not in year one, because, man, a sugar high will get you through year one. But I really wonder, as they start to not only stack recruiting classes on top of each other, but they just stack years on top of each other. The first year is not always the tell. Year 2, 3, and 4, that's when the new staff's thumbprint is actually on the program, and everything about the program is a reflection of leadership. That's where a lot of those Texas folks are going to have an eagle eye, even more so than they ever have in Big 12, because they're not using 4-month thinking right now. They're using 4-year thinking. They're trying to look down the road and say, we're in a new neighborhood now, and a bad year for us is no longer going to be 9-3. If we mess around in this new neighborhood, we could find ourselves teetering in and out of bowl.
Yeah, you go 6-6 real quick, because I mean that's my next point, Josh. It's a perfect segue. Looking at, because here's what I say: anybody, and look, the game of football is different than college basketball. There's a lot more parity and a lot more ability for bigger upsets to happen in college basketball. You look at UMBC and Virginia and stuff like that. Not that there's not big upsets in college football, but the thing about playing in the SEC isn't about the one-off bowl game. It isn't about the one time, well, Oklahoma and Florida play, but Florida has 8 guys sitting out because they're not in the playoff or whatever. It's having to go through the gauntlet of that SEC schedule. It's having to play LSU, then Arkansas, then Florida, then Bama, and back to back to back to back. And if you look at the depth, that's the difference, especially on the defensive side. And for a team like Oklahoma, and look, I know this was not a random move. This is a preemptive move for something else that's happening. So to me, that would explain why Oklahoma would want to leave a conference that, you know, for lack of a better term, they've been dominating. Just like Ohio State's really been dominating the Big Ten, maybe on somewhat of a different scale. You look at Clemson in the ACC. So to make that move, in my opinion, it's a preemptive move on something else. But I agree with you on the Texas advantage thing coming to the SEC. There's no way Texas could have more of an advantage. I think that's one of the few programs where it's not like, well, it's a huge kick in the pants. And I know Oklahoma's recruited Florida really well. You watch what Urban Meyer did at Ohio State, trying to build that pipeline down the South as well. It's a smart thing to do. It's where the best players are. Women lie, men lie, numbers don't lie. But Josh, having to go through I mean, there is, Vandy. Okay, I get it. but Kentucky's not going to be bad. Missouri's on the come up. South Carolina eventually, I think, with Shane Beamer and the personnel that he will get, not that's on campus right there. But talk about Josh having to go through the gauntlet of that SEC schedule, because even Oklahoma struggled with the Iowa States and teams like that. You are going to get something like that at least up front most weeks, and especially on defense. Just the depth is so much better in this league.
Let me tell you what I did a couple of years ago. I took a buddy. This was totally illegal, but I did it anyway. So I got a buddy sideline passes to, I think it was Auburn, Mississippi State. And so I'm standing there. Auburn's got a decent team. I can't even remember what this year was, but it was, it was the latter portion, I want to say, of the Mullen tenure. It may have even been the first year from Moorhead. Anyway, Mullen's guys are on the roster for Mississippi State. They're not going anywhere that year. Probably they're headed to a 7-win season. And my buddy is a fan, let's just say, of a major non-SEC traditional power. So we are standing on the sideline there, and you're seeing what you see. You stand on the sideline. You ever played the game or coached the game, you know what I'm talking about. Yep. The bigger games, you sort of have concussions come off the bigger hits. You feel them. It's like a shotgun blast. You feel them on the sideline. And so that happens a couple of times. And it's Mississippi State players doling the hit out. And so driving home, he's in silence. And then all of a sudden, he kind of out of the blue, we're listening to the radio, and he says, I kind of get what they mean now. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I had always thought that this whole strength of the SEC schedule and this whole gauntlet talk, it was a little bit overblown because all I was doing was looking at records. And I thought all 7-win teams are created equal, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of like a pro sports mentality. You are what your record says you are. Well, that's not true at all in college sports because of the gulf in the parity of the strength of schedule and the strength of roster. And so he said, what I was thinking about is Auburn won this game today, and they were favored, and so they won it, and they're really not going to get a ton of credit for it. Everyone just thinks that's what you're supposed to do. But he said, those licks on the field, it didn't make them any less hard. And that Auburn team has to go play someone else next week. And the lingering effect of this Mississippi State game is still on them. So then I times that by 4 or 5 or however many of those kinds of conference games you have to play per year. And all of a sudden it makes sense how you're beat to death later in the season and you end up losing games. And that's one way to look at it, and that's accurate. The other way to look at it is very much simpler, and that is that good and bad, according to record, it's all relative. So if I were to take the Ole Miss Rebels last year and I were to drop them in the AAC as is, I would probably favor them to win 10 games. They would be viewed nationally as a respectable top 15 caliber program, even though we just changed nothing about the team. All we did was change the schedule. And so if that's the only change, then that means we have, well, not we, I speak collectively. Some people have long since lost the ability to use nuance and logic in judging good and bad in college sports. And so, to be honest with you, it was 5 minutes ago. I don't even remember what the question was, but I said what I wanted to say, and I hope everyone heard every word.
Yeah, I think they did. Shout out Feyzan, our audio guy, and David Kuhn, our production guy. If they didn't, then we're gonna have to talk to some people behind the scenes. But no, Josh, look, at the end of the day, Drake said it best. I mean, there's levels to it. I mean, there's levels to it. And looking at records and not understanding, or just going off bowl games where 7 or 8 guys opted out to try and formulate your hypothesis on the ability of a team or a conference, you're just swimming uphill. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, from coaching, it's amazing. You go in those medical rooms and training rooms after the games, regardless if it's Mississippi State, if it's Tennessee, or whatever. And it looks like a triage hospital from the Civil War. I mean, it's unbelievably physical. And anybody that's been on the sideline, because going to a game is one thing, and sitting in the stands. When you are on the sidelines and you can not only, like you said, hear the hits, but feel the hits, it is vicious. Because again, it's like being in a car accident about 140 plays a game. I mean, it's legitimate, and that's legitimate fact. And I want to ask you about what's going to happen to the SEC and your thoughts on pods and divisions and all that as we wrap up here with Josh Pate from Late Kick. Check that out. 247 Sports as well does a hell of a job. Notre Dame, Josh. Notre Dame. So let's just say, and again, I'll throw a hypothetical at you because this is what we do. The SEC adds Texas and Oklahoma. Let's say the Big 12 and the Pac-12 merge. What happens to Notre Dame? Can you stay independent? Can you really stay independent? Or what do you think happens? Because I'm looking at it, and I'm sure there's calls going out the yin-yang, not only to Notre Dame, but NBC as well.
Well, they don't obviously want to be proactive in joining a conference. Now, that's been the case forever. So what really new has formed here? How's the landscape changed? Well, in some ways it's changed a lot, obviously with conference realignment. But really, the only thing that I think Notre Dame needs to be focused on, given their stance, is how is out-of-conference scheduling going to be impacted by this?
That's
if you
the
have
biggest question.
conferences, then it obviously stands to reason the more conference members, then the more conference games, which lessens the ability for Notre Dame to build a quality schedule, which exists for them on its own. There is no in-conference, out-of-conference. So if the out-of-conference apparatus for these conferences is still there and Notre Dame's hand is not forced, I really don't think there's going to be any rush for them to lose that independence. Now, the other way around this is for all these conferences, what we, as of the moment, call Power Five, but that's going to be a label only. That's going to be like Coke for any kind of soda soon. But the Power Five, members that be, if you will, they could tomorrow force the hand of Notre Dame if they want to. But the way to look at it is not, should they? You got to look at it selfishly. Like the Big Ten, yeah, they could cast their vote, and the ACC could cast their vote, and the SEC could cast their vote, and they could force Notre Dame to either join a conference or be out of the playoff picture. But when you do that, it is a disproportionate risk versus reward for any one conference, because the Big Ten could give a yes vote only to see Notre Dame go join the ACC. And so that's a net loss for you. You don't get any money from that. The ACC gets a ton of money from that. And so none of these conferences, and nor will they, ever get together, I think, and force the hand, knowing that it could end up as a loss for them. So you either have out of conference forcing Notre Dame's hand, or you have the most unlikely path, which is just an overall change of heart in South Bend. And they really, really value that independence. And I've never really knocked them for it. I get it. I'd probably do the same thing if I were them, but it'll be very interesting. The out of conference aspect, that's what to watch as all this unfolds.
Yeah, and look, that's what it's going to come down to, in my opinion. Because again, if I'm the SEC and I'm adding Oklahoma and Texas, and now you have to, and I'll get into this in a second, since you add teams, you're going to have to add another conference game. Why on earth would I ever schedule Notre Dame? I would never do it out of conference, like you're saying. If I'm the ACC and I merge with somebody, or if we're adding these super conferences and Notre Dame's out, you're never going to get scheduled. It's a de facto strength of schedule beater. There's no reason. It's like me. I would never schedule Notre Dame. I would never schedule a team that runs the triple option, and then we'd have it there. And that, Josh, kind of brings me to my final point. And I know you got to run here in a second, but the way that the SEC, and I want to stick to the SEC here, is going to be shaped from a structural standpoint, from a scheduling standpoint, adding these two teams. So we're at 16. Obviously, nobody's getting kicked out. Vanderbilt. Sorry. Are you a fan of the pods? Because I find it very interesting, because I'm looking at the way the pods would work, and you almost have to put rivalries together. Auburn and Alabama has to be in one. Ole Miss, Mississippi State has to be in one. I can go down the list. And I feel that the pods aren't the way to go. I just want your opinion on the structure of the SEC with a 16-team deal.
I have honestly not even given it a whole lot of thought. I talked to someone in the scheduling, whatever you want to call it, department in the SEC about this. And it's funny, the juxtaposition of where the public versus the administrative side is. The public has already made their edits and their quote graphics and their different hypothetical pods and divisions. And then you talk to people in the league office and they say, dude, we don't even know how many teams we're going to have.
Yeah.
We haven't even started on that. We haven't even so much as sketched anything on a pizza box. And I think that's true. So just to be blatantly honest with you, I don't really care which format they go with. I could see merit and I could see dissenting view in both. I remember back in the day, probably the first time anyone put a microphone in front of my face, I thought I was going to be cool and tell the future and talk about super conferences and how pods were better than divisions. There's a reason why that's what I went with on my first day. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit in the room. And so I don't remember what I said. I guarantee it was probably wrong. And so I think that depending on your stance, if you have no natural rivals versus, for instance, if you have two, like Alabama with Tennessee and Auburn, that may dramatically change your point of view on this. And you're also going to have a lot of people with really, really white hair and really, really deep pockets that also have a say in this that you don't even know the names of, nor do we need to know the names of. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. Look, here's what I hope. You give me whatever scheduling format you want, as long as you just promise me we stop at 16 teams. If you can promise me that, I'll take whatever scheduling format you dish out.
Yeah, and look, because I just look at it from a coaching perspective and the gauntlet of being, if you have one pod with A&M, Texas, Oklahoma and Missouri. I mean, that's a death sentence. But no, it is interesting fodder. I believe they should just do it like the SEC does in basketball and not have divisions and just let them play. Look, it sucks you're going to finish 15th, but somebody's got to do it. And I just want it to be fair as much as possible, even though that is a dream that we will never achieve, especially in the Southeastern Conference in certain places. But it's going to be interesting to follow, man. And the way they decided, I always worry when the parachute is getting built on the way down in some things. You look at NIL, which, obviously the rollout of that hasn't been nearly as detrimental as a lot of people thought. You had people like Jodie Foster in the panic room right when that got announced, like all of a sudden everything was going to be crazy. But it's going to be interesting to follow, Josh. Speaking about interesting to follow, man, tell everybody where they can find Late Kick, where they can find you on social media. And I am sure maybe next time we come on, aliens will have landed and we'll know the conference and pods, or we can maybe just talk about fall camp previews like we thought we were going to until the bomb got dropped the other day at SEC Media Days.
Yeah, the aliens are not the big deal anymore. It's which division they're going to play in. It's the big deal.
Hey, that's true. It's probably the SEC.
That's probably the talking point. Yeah, so the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel is the hub for everything we're doing. We've got about 14, feels like, big announcements coming. I'm standing on the top of a parking garage in downtown Nashville looking at a building that will soon be my new home. And no one knows that. So actually, let's mute that. So we continue. The 24/7 Sports YouTube channel, that is where to find it, at Late Kick Josh on any social platform. And you know the rest. Late Kick Podcast, wherever you get your pods.
Definitely, man. We got a couple announcements coming too, buddy. You're doing a great job. I always appreciate your time, Josh. Stay safe out there, brother.
All right, man. Appreciate it.
All right. We appreciate you guys joining us as well. Go to thejboyshow.com. Go to @thejboyshow on Twitter, Instagram. Make sure you subscribe. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube as well. We're dropping the best content for the best minds around for another edition of the Jboy Show. I'm Jboy, and we're gone.
The Jboy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Feyzan Shareef, Production Assistants Blain, Crain, and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crain, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with the Jboy Show.